All right. Everybody, let's get this show started.
Hi, Professor. I actually had one question about the assignment. Do you mind me asking right now?
Sure, you got 1 minute. What's up?
Yeah, so I was going through the rubric and it said that the create, course, and methods like that should return a promise object as opposed to an actual. So does a return JSON count as a promise object, or should we um,
So
like
by default, it returns a promise. You don't have to do anything. So
okay?
you
So
don't have
if
to
if we
specifically
if we
do
don't
anything
say
to return
dot
a promise.
JSON on it. Sorry, if we don't do dot JSON on it, that means it returns a promise, right? Because in
Yeah,
console, it's locked as an
right,
object.
response.json returns a promise already.
Okay, so in the console, when I print it in the console, it prints a normal JSON object. So that's fine, right? It doesn't say promise. It just prints the course object.
I mean, if you print out response.json inside of a then yes. But if you print out the response.json all by itself, it is a promise.
Okay. Okay,
So
got it.
if you print it after the then yes, it returns an object.
Got it. Okay.
But if you print it out before outside of a then no, it's a promise. So it's
Okay.
already returning a promise. You don't have to do anything.
Okay, got it. Perfect. Just confirm. Thank you so much.
Yeah. All right, excellent. Welcome, everyone. Let's see, we are getting started into our 6th week, and we're going to get started on some a little bit more advanced and challenging topics such as Redux and web services. So it's going to get really, really exciting, up and coming. We do have an assignment due later this week. I believe it's Wednesday, and then we'll discuss the next assignment on Redux. But I did want to start chatting about it and introducing the topic. It is a fairly challenging topic, so I want to spread it over several days, and wanted to start with something really, really simple. Hopefully, that's something that you can wrap around your head in a really, really trivial example. There are a couple of slides here that go through several trivial examples, and I encourage you all to go through all those examples on your own, try to replicate it and practice it. See if you can just follow along today's lecture, very passively. Just try to soak in what we're doing, and we're just going to repeat it several times. So these next few lectures might feel a little bit repetitive, but the intent is that you'll get a sense of what all the different moving parts that are happening, and once you do it and repeat it on your own, then it'll start making sense. Redux is one of the more harder things to pick up, and but definitely it'll pay off in the long run. So let me just review where we've been and where we're going. We did introduce the first week just plain old HTML, CSS. What is the World Wide Web, Internet? We talked about styling, responsive design using CSS. We introduced dynamic manipulation of the DOM using JavaScript, and then we introduced React.js as a thick layer of a library that can abstracts the underlying HTML DOM so that we can build applications in terms of components. And then we introduced routing as a mechanism for implementing navigation in single-page applications. And you are currently working on an assignment that plays around with these two topics, right? React for building single page web applications and routing, React routing DOM to do the navigation part. Right. So this week we're going to introduce Redux, and it's going to go on this week and part of next week. Since again, it's a fairly complex topic that to Wednesday. Let me check. The React assignment. Oh, it says due today. I think I'm gonna. Does everybody feel that they can submit today, or I could have sworn I had moved it to Wednesday. Okay, it says 22. Is it okay if I move it to Wednesday? All right, so let's move it to Wednesday. I thought that I had already moved it to Wednesday, and then we can introduce the Redux assignment on Wednesday. Although I do want to talk about the topic, start talking about it today. Yeah, so let's move that to Wednesday. You okay? I'll move it. I'll make the changes. All right, excellent. All right. Yeah. So the topic of today and this week will be Redux. Now, Redux is an alternative way of managing state. We talked about managing state using React. We saw that you can establish a state variable in a class and then share that state with other components, and then those components can manipulate the state by calling functions back and forth between the class that contains the state and the classes that might have the event handlers. Okay, and so sometimes this communication is very awkward, especially if you have multiple layers of components. Where in the example that we had in class in the assignment, let me show you what I mean. If you have the course manager maintaining the state up here, right, having the state component, right, maintaining the state, and all the event handlers are implemented in this class, right? We have here the update course, we have the delete course, we have the add course, and then the actual events are being generated downstream, right, inside of the course table. And then inside of the course table, we have the course row. And in the course row is where we actually have the buttons to delete a course, right, to save a course. And all those need to trickle up, right? They need to trickle up to the parent, right, through the table, right, through the table that we pass it down, right, and then up to the course manager that we pass a reference down to these course tables, and then you call them, but they're actually implemented up here, right? So if you have 2, 3, 4 levels of a page that has components within components within components within components, you can get into the a case where you have to pass all these event handlers down to the smaller components, and then the smaller components can then have to call all the way up the chain of where the state is being maintained. Okay, and this creates a difficult situation of maintaining the state and passing the state around, and so Redux tries to solve that problem by centralizing the state, by ripping all that state management away from the components, right, and instead declaring it in some kind of a global state, right, a global application state that all components, any component that wants to look at that state, they can ask for it, right? So if I'm interested in the state, I can ask for that state. I can use it without having to have the dependency between all the layers, right, of having to jump hoops, going down and then up the chain of components, right? So what Redux tries to do is to decouple state management from the UI, right? So that the UI doesn't instead of having this user interface here, these components, and then maintaining their own state, and then trying to share this state across multiple other UI components. Instead of doing that, what we're going to try and do is rip out all this communication, all this manipulation of the state outside of the component and put it in a separate JavaScript only piece of code, right? That can implement all that logic. Okay, so that's going to make it much easier to maintain that state. Okay. Okay, so let's so that's what we're going to try and do. All right, is everybody okay? Okay, so I'm going to first create a really simple example to try to illustrate what the problem is, right, and how we can re-implement the same simple example using Redux. Okay, so let's try and do that. All right, so let's create here under components. Let's create a counter directory, and we're going to implement a simple counter using React, right? Using this React state solution that we have here, and we're going to re-implement it again using Redux, right? And we'll see the differences between the two. Okay, so first of all, let's create a version of this that uses just plain old React, right? So we'll call this counter using React state. Okay, so let's do that. So let's implement a JavaScript here, and we'll say here that we say counter using React. And so we might do something like this, right? We have import React from React. And so we'll do a class, just a simple, we'll use classes first, right? Let's see, we'll do export default class counter using React. And this is going to extend React.count component. All right, and this is going to render, and it's going to return just we'll say div, and this will be h1 counter. Yeah, we'll display the counter here, and we might let's see if we can just display this for now. Okay, let's get started here. If we go to our index page, right now we are rendering this app. Yes, so let's try and render our counter, which is our counter React. All right, let's run it. Let's see what we got so far. There it is, just counter. And in the counter, we probably might want to keep track of the actual state. So we might have here state variable, and then we have the count, right, is 0. Well, we'll start with 123. How's that? Just something simple. And we can just display it here, and this would be this dot state dot count. Oh, can't type today. There it is. Counter is 1, 2, 3. Everybody good? All right. Then we might want to have maybe a couple buttons to manipulate the count, and so we might have maybe a button here that says up, and another button that says down. There they are, up and down. Okay, and we would implement it here. Maybe functions might be const up as a function, right? I guess we don't need const. And we have down. Okay, and we can call them from here. We can say on click. This is this dot down, and this would be on click this dot up. Everybody good? Okay. So how would we change the state? Well, the new state will be whatever the old state was plus 1 or minus 1. So we need to use the syntax that takes the function as an argument so that we can know what the old state was, the old count, so that we can calculate the new count in terms of the old count. Okay, so this would be something like this dot set state, and this would be a function that takes the previous state, and here we what do we do here? We return the new state, and it would be return the count equal to previous count dot count plus 1. Right, that's how we calculate going up. And the down would be same thing, right? Would be this dot set state, right, with the previous state, and then we return the count is equal to the previous count minus 1. Okay, there's a question on the chat. Let's see. Could you explain what value does previous state have? The value is whatever this is, right? So you get a copy of the current state, and the current state right now is count is equal to 1, 2, 3. So this is equal to whatever that was in the previous state. So it's an object. It's the same object that you got here. So it has the value count in there, whatever it used to be. So it's 1, 2, 3, and then it becomes 1, 2, 1, 2, 4, right? So this is going to replace the current state, right? So that next time around, if I click on up again, what I'm going to get is yet again this, but with this 1, 2, 4. So whatever the previous state was, right? It's initialized to be state at first. Okay. All right. So let's see if this works. If we go back here and we say up, notice that it does go up. It goes down. All right. So it works. Everybody good? Okay. All right, so what we're trying to, so this is fine. This is totally fine. There's nothing wrong with this. Things start to get messy when you're trying to break this up into multiple components, right? So let's do that. Let's try and break this up into 3 components. 1 that just displays the value, and 2 that are trying to update the value, right? So you might break it up into the following. Obviously, this is a trivial example, not that you would want to break it up. This is too simple to want to break it up, but the point I'm trying to make is showing you the complexities that appear when you're trying to break it up into several components. Okay, so let's break this up into 2 other components. One, it will be the JavaScript here will be a counter display. So this only displays the count. So this will be import React from React. So this is going to export default class counter display. So this is going to extends React.component, and this is going to be this is going to be a constructor props. There we go. And this is going to render, and it's going to return the following. It'll be what am I displaying? This right here, right? That's what's going to render right now. So that's what's going to render. And where am I going to get the count? I don't have the state, right? I don't have the state. So my parent is going to share the state with me. How do we do that? We pass in, right? We pass in counter display. We're going to pass the count from our current state. Right? We pass it down. And then here, I can just say this props.count. Okay? Let's see. Could you explain what does these constructor do? What values does props have? So this props over here, this props is a map, right, that takes all these values, right? So name value pair, so name value, anything that I pass here, it creates a map, right, of the keys of the map is going to be these attributes, and the values of the map will be these values. And it passes it down to props. And then here we just copy it into our parent component, right? So it's available across the whole instance of this class, right? And then I can then reuse that all those properties, right? And I can use the map, right? And the value. So this count is mapped to this count over here. So so the value of this will be whatever value I passed in over here. Okay. Question: whatever you send as properties to the element, whatever you declare it. Yep, exactly. Yeah, I can declare here whatever, hello. Right, I can declare a new attribute here. It says hello, how are you? Right, and then here I can just display. I can just display here this dot props dot hello. Right, so how does that render? There we go. How are you? See that? So I am passing the hello is mapped to this how are you, and that's what gets rendered right here. And the value 1, 2, 3 is the value of count, right? That I'm rendering as this that props that count. Let me throw that away. So that's all I want. So this component is working, right? I'm passing down the value of the state and it's being rendered. Or now let's do these two over here. Let's do these two. Let's go back. We want to create components out of these, right? So we'll create a counter up component. So new JavaScript. So this will be counter up. Right. This will be again import React from React. And then this will be a export default class counter up that extends React that component, and it's going to render this button, right? So I'm just going to return the button. Okay. All right. But I don't have this here. I don't have this here. So somebody needs to pass it to me. Now notice I'm not going to use the constructor, right? I'm not going to use the constructor. It's gonna bind it automatically for me. So I'm going to say here counter up. I'm going to pass down an attribute, which I'm going to call. Oh wait, did I say down? No, that's a. I'm going to pass in the down. This dot down. So I'm passing down. I'm passing to counter up. I guess I used the wrong one. Down for the up. So I'm going to say up here. This is I'm going to pass the up, and this will be up. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing, but for the down in a minute. All right, so I'm passing up, which is basically this one, right? And what am I returning? The button. And what am I going to call? Well, up, which I'm passing in a reference to this up function. So I'm passing it to the counter up, which I can then use here. Enclave this dot props dot up. And so this up is tied to this up, which is tied to this up over here. Okay, right? Okay, so let's see. They both work. They both say up. Either one. Okay. Question is, so do we? So we do not need the constructor. Yeah, the constructor automatically does that for us. It already copies the properties for us. Yes. Sometimes you need to pre-process the components. Maybe you want to copy them into the state, for instance. You would do that in the constructor. But by default, the constructor takes all those properties and binds them to the instance, right? Implicitly, right? But oftentimes you need to copy them into a local storage or local state, and then you would do that in the constructor. That's not for free. Okay. All right. So let's do the same thing for counter down. Right. So counter down is going to look very similar to the counter up. So I'm going to copy that. So I'm going to call this down. And then down, this is going to be counter down. And this is going to say down, maybe in a separate line, so it's easy to read. And this will be tied to down. Now we can replace this. We can replace this with counter down, right? And we're going to pass in the property this dot down. Everybody good? All right, and it works perfectly. Everybody good? All right, so the problem here, first of all, you have this state here, which is, there's nothing wrong with the state over here. And we have all these event handlers that are implemented here in the counter React, right? Whereas all the other ones don't have any state. So counter display doesn't have any state. Counter up, counter down, these don't have any state. Okay, so these over here could perfectly be implemented using functions, just plain old functions, right? There's no need even to use classes because they're not maintaining any class variables, right? So this could have been very well implemented using. Actually, let's do that. Let's re-implement it counter up, right? Let's re-implement this using just a plain old function, right? So this could have been as follows. This could have been export. Let's see. This could be const function, and this could be like that, right? And then we don't even need this return. I mean the render like that, and this does export default counter up. Okay, and we broke something. Oh, there's no props here. Instead, we receive it as this. So it becomes up like that. Right? And this works just the same. Yes, it works just the same. And this could be even more terse. It could just be this. Right? Even much more terse, up and down. Everybody good? Right. So when you don't have any state variables, then certainly it's easier to just implement it using, instead of a class, just implement it as a function. Especially if you don't have any state variables. When you have a state variable, then we usually decide to have implement it as a class, or use hooks, which we briefly introduced earlier, and we'll come back to that a little later. Okay. What I want to point out here is that usually there's this big object that maintains the state. It is responsible for updating the state, deleting the state, and then sharing that state with its siblings or with its children. Okay, and then if those children can then share with their children, right? So you can create this long chain of components that have to share the state down to the lower components, and then methods that are being invoked from the low-level components that go all the way up to the parent who maintains the state. And that creates a complexity of all these components that if you remove a component or you move it around, right, and you need to remove it and move it somewhere else, right, you're breaking that communication, right? So because there's this strong dependency, across this chain, any link that you break, right, that you want to move it around, right, creates a huge maintenance a problem, right? So what we want to be able to do is rewrite this in such a way that we don't need to pass anything. We want to remove this dependency. Obviously, if we remove it like this, right, this doesn't work. So how can we rewrite this so that there is no dependency in the chain, that if someone way down here wants to know what the state is and the functions and whatnot, they could just ask for it, right? And nobody in between would have to care that the communication is going up and down. Make sense? So we want to remove the dependencies, right, in this long chain, right, where everybody can be treated independently of each other. But obviously, you still have to maintain this local state somewhere. You still have to maintain this state somewhere. You still have to maintain this logic on how do I update the state, right? How do I do that? So we're gonna use Redux. Redux is one of the more popular mechanisms today on how to solve this problem, on how to centralize the state and share it amongst multiple components, right? Now, the setup of Redux is the most challenging part, setting it up, right? There's going to be a lot of plumbing, that I need to hook this up over here and hook that up over there, and I need to do this, that, and the other. And that's where most people get scared and they get discouraged, right? And I can only tell you that this will come, this will get easier as you practice it yourself, right? You have to do it yourself, right? Try to just recreate what we're doing here in class and do it on your own, right? And then as you do it more and more and more and more, things will start clicking and says, ah, okay, I gotta do this, that, and the other, right? But it's a very well known fact that it has a very steep learning curve. So don't get discouraged, right? Don't says, oh, I just don't get it, I'm just stupid. No, you're not. It's it's a very steep learning curve. It just comes with practice. Okay, so I'm gonna recreate this using Redux. Okay, all right. Okay, so here's a React state. I'm gonna create another directory. I'm gonna create another directory, and I'm gonna call it using Redux state instead of doing React state. Okay, we'll try and rip out all this out of here so it doesn't live inside of a class anymore. All right, excellent. So let's create here. Same thing. We're gonna have a JavaScript, and we're gonna call it. Well, what do we call it over here? This one, counter. Okay, yeah, counter. So we'll call this new JavaScript. We'll call it counter instead of counter React. We'll call it counter Redux. The name obviously doesn't matter. Okay, so this is going to. Well, first of all, we'll need to. Let's create the user interface like we had earlier, right? We have import React from React, and then this will be export default class counter Redux, and this extends React dot component. Okay. Component. All right, so here we're going to do a render, just like before, right? And here we want a h1, this counter, and whatever that is, and we want a couple buttons. So up and down. All right. Okay. And so let's now go back to our index here, and instead of using our counter React, we're going to import the counter Redux, and we'll replace this with counter Redux. We'll refresh. There it is. So we have the same user interface, but now it's broken. It doesn't do anything, right? We don't have a state. We don't have anything. We don't have any state. But we don't want the state. We don't want the state. We want to create these components down here without, right? Without the dependencies between them. We don't want any dependencies. All right. So let's create what these might look like. Right. What would they look like? Let's see. Redux here. So I can say I can create the counter display. Now, what the beauty of this is that because none of these are going to maintain any state, they don't have to be classes. They can be just plain old functions. Right? They can be just plain functions. Right? So this is going to import React from React. And this is just going to be a function. It's going to be constant counter display. And it's going to display what? Right here, this right here, right? And that's all, right? We're going to export default counter display. All right. So this we can replace by counter display. In React, right here, this one. Okay, and we'll replace these two also. Same thing. Let's see, is it still working? I can pass. I can I could pass state variables here. I can say, that the count, right, is 1, 2, 3, right? And presumably I can receive it here, the count, and I can just display it here, right? Just like we know how to do this 1, 2, 3, right? But I want to break out, I don't want it to be there any dependency between any parent component and having to pass that down. So I want to remove that. I don't want you to have that. Instead, here I can initialize it, for instance. I can initialize it, right, 3, 2, 1, whatever, right? This means that if you do not pass me the state, I'm going to initialize it to 3, 2, 1. If nobody passes it to me, I'm going to initialize it by default to 3, 2, 1. So is Redux something that's used on top of React? Yes. Yes. Well, not overriding state management. You can still use just plain old React state management. You can use them in tandem, right? Usually when you use Redux, right, for maintaining application-wide state, right? So state that is shared amongst the entire application. But you can decide to, if you have a component that is self-contained, in the self-contained component, you can decide to use React state or hooks, for instance, right? React hooks. So that's a good mixture of using both strategies, right? So use Redux for the application-wide state management, where you don't want to have sharing, data amongst components. But if a component wants to have its own self-contained state, maybe you have a little form, right, where you want to do validation, you want to do highlighting things, right? You want to do, you want to do, lookups or dictionary lookups or things like that. Then if it's self-contained to that component, then that's fine, right? You might use React state, or you might use hooks, okay? But application-wide, we would still use Redux. Okay, so my point here is that the count for us, right, is this application-wide state, right, that we do not want to share amongst the components, okay? All right. Okay, so this would be also components. Let's create a component for those as well. So create up, so new JavaScript component. So this will be counter up. I guess I'm not following my naming convention. Let's change that. So this will be counter dash up. And in here, we'll say import React from React. And then we're going to do a const counter up is a function. And it's going to return a button up like that, right? And we're going to say export default counter up. And this is going to be very simple, similar to down. So down, this will be counter down. If I could spell, this would be down and counter down. And here in the counter Redux, we're going to replace this with counter down and counter up. All right, there we go. They don't do anything yet. Okay, all right, so we're going to implement it. We don't want the state here. We do not want the state here. So what do we do? Okay, we want to be able to have it a state that is global to everybody, that everybody can see the state, and also the updates of this. How do we communicate with that state and manipulate that state? Right. So how do we do that? Well, this is how we're going to do it. Outside, right, in a separate file, right. Here I'm going to do it in this file right here, so that we can have it all in one place, so you can see how it works, right? But eventually we're going to break it out into multiple files, right? This is going to be fairly simple, as Redux goes. So I'm going to have it in the same file, but typically you would have it in separate files, and we'll do that later on, and we'll clean it up. First, we're going to have to install two libraries, right? First, we're going to do npm install Redux. So it's going to download Redux. And we're also, so this is the core library that has all the behaviors. And we need the React Redux. Okay. This is a library that is the glue between the core library and the React, right? So Redux is not React specific, right? So Redux is a library that can be used to maintain state in any single page application. You know, even if it's using jQuery or Angular or Vue or even Node.js, server side. So it's a state management library that is not specific to any one library. Okay, it's not specific to any one UI framework. Okay, so how do we do this? Okay, so what we're going to do is that we're going to declare a variable, right? That's going to have our initial state, and the initial state might be that the count is 2, 3, 4, right? So very, very similar to what we did here, right? In a counter React, we declare some variable that is maintaining some initial state. Okay, so same thing we're doing here. We're creating some initial state. Then we're going to, let's see, is there a question on the chat? So an example use case of Redux would be a product launch waitlist where a global counter is being used. Sure, a global counter, if that's the only state, right? I would imagine you have a lot of different things that you are maintaining the state of, right? Not only the count, right? You're maintaining a product list, you're maintaining, all the shopping carts, and you're maintaining all this are application-wide state, right? That is being maintained in a single place. Well, not in a single place. You can have multiple states going on, right? All maintained by Redux. You can break it up into a large state that maintains multiple substates that maintain multiple substates, right? You can break it up as big as you want or small as you want, right? Obviously, the example that I'm giving you is fairly trivial, right? It's just a single variable, right? But for the assignments, right, you're going to use it for maintaining the list of modules, the list of lessons, the list of topics, the list of widgets, right? These are all going to be maintained in their own Redux state that together is going to be the application-wide state. Okay. Okay. So let's go on, and so now I have this. So I need to be able to implement what we had here, right? That I need to be able to maintain the state, and I need to be able to manipulate the state. Right? I need to be able to increase, or I need to mutate the state, right? As events occur, as different actions. Okay, so how do I do that? Well, here's how you do it. You centralize everything in one function who's going to encapsulate, is going to calculate with an initial, starting from an initial state. I'm going to create a single function that is going to be responsible for calculating the next state based on the previous state. So basically, I want to grab this. I want to grab this here, and I want to put it in one single place, okay, into a single function that is responsible for doing everything, right? Now, we're going to refer to this function, this magical function that is going to handle and calculate the next state. We're going to call it the reducer. The reducer, okay? And so it's just a plain old function. You can call it whatever you want, right? You can call it whatever you want, but basically it maps, right, actions that users take, like up and down, right? Actions, different actions, add to the shopping cart, delete from the shopping cart, whatever, right? And they calculate, it reduces that state into the next state, right? So this function is going to take two arguments. It's going to take the current state, or I guess this would be called the previous state, right? And we're going to initialize it to be the initial state. Okay. And the second argument is an action. All right. And this is going to be a function. It's going to be a function. So it's a function that says, this is to map it to exactly what we have here, a good name for this would be previous state. That would be a great name. Perfect. Usually people, when they write the reducers, they use the name of the parameter. They call it just state, plain old state. But because I have drilled into you the use of previous state in all these examples, I'm going to use this as previous state so that you understand that this is whatever the previous state was, so that I can calculate the next state. Okay. All right. So an action is going to represent all the possible things that a user could do, right? What are the two things that in this case that the user could do? Well, they could click on the up or the down button, right? And so I'm going to write here a switch statement that's going to say if the action type, so type is going to be a required attribute of all actions. And this is how we're going to tell the reducer what happened. We're going to create events, right? As people click different buttons and they drag or they type at the keyboard, whatever they do, they're going to generate a stream of events. And each event is going to be a type. And we need to decide what the types are. Up to this point, there's only two types, right? Two things that the user can do is generate an up event or a down event. And we do that through setting the type of the action. So on this side, we're going to say, well, if the action is up, then the reducer, so the reducer's, remember, the reducer's role is to calculate what the next state is, just like we did here, right? The responsibility of the set state is to take the previous state and calculate what the next state is. So same thing here. If it's up, it's going to calculate the next state to be what? It's going to be that the count is going to be equal to the previous state count plus 1. Just like we did over here. The count is the previous state count plus 1. Otherwise, right, if instead the case is down, right, then we're going to set the count to whatever the previous state count was, minus 1. Okay. If it's an event that we don't know about, right, if we say that the case is the default, meaning you sent us a type of action that we have no idea what to do with it, we're just going to return the previous state, meaning we're not going to move from here, right? We're going to leave it the way it was. Everybody good? Okay, so basically this here, all this is going to replace all the possible, set state and event handlers and blah, 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 all that and the state here, right? All that is going to be encapsulated all inside of this function, the reducer. Everybody good? All right, so let's use this. How do we use this? So how do we use this? How do we connect it? How do we plug it in, right, with these three? Let's see. Neil is raising his hand. Neil, you have a question?
Yeah, Professor. So we spoke about Redux. What exactly is Redux doing in this situation? I mean, didn't we just write a state
We haven't
and
done
then
anything
get a
yet.
switch case? Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah, we haven't done
I-
anything. We've only implemented this function.
Okay, yeah. I was just wondering where the library is coming into play. That was
Yeah,
my
no, we
question.
haven't used Redux yet.
Okay,
Not yet.
perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm about to do that. Yes. So yeah, my question is, how do we connect, right, this user interface? How do we connect it to this data, this state management, right? So the reducer knows how to calculate the next state, right? It knows what the current state is, right? So how do I hook it up? And here's where the plumbing comes in. Here's where the plumbing comes in, and I lose most everybody when I start talking about the plumbing. Okay, it's the hardest thing in Redux is to do the plumbing between these two worlds. Okay, and so we're going to do it a lot of times. We're going to do it repeatedly, over and over and over, right? Until as we repeatedly do it, we could say, oh, okay, I see the pattern. Right, there's always a pattern. It's always the same thing, right? And hopefully, after doing it a whole bunch of times, then you'll say, okay, I think I can do it on my own. All right. That's what we want, right? We want everybody to be able to do this on their own. Okay, so how do we do this? Okay, so first we create a store, right? The store, right, in Redux is basically where the states, as the reducer generates these states, basically it generates a stream of states that the application can be in, right? They're going to be stored in the store, right? So the store is going to be the collection of all the states that the application can be in, right? And who's going to populate the store? We're going to populate the store with our reducer. So the reducer is going to populate the states in the store. So the store is going to contain the state. And we're going to pass down that state to our application. We're going to provide the store to all the components. We want to pass this state to all the components, and then the components can decide whether they want something from the state or not, right? It's opt-in, right? Each component can decide, oh yeah, I want to know what the counter is because I want to display it. And the counter down might say, oh yeah, I want to know the state because I want to update it, down or up or whatever, right? But they don't have to. A component can just completely ignore the state, right? So now it's a choice of each one of them to decide whether they want to pull something from the state or not. So how do we do that? So we're going to wrap this whole thing with a provider. Provider is a part of the glue that allows us to glue the reducer to React. Okay, so there it is. There it is. So we wrap the whole thing that we want this to get the state with a provider, and then we provide a reference to the store. There it is, our store here. Let's see, there's a question in the chat. So the store is like an array which stores the state for different components. Yes, not an array, a map. It creates a map, right, that collects all the possible states that are generated. Okay, all the possible states that are generated. Okay, so how does the counter now pull data? Right, the counter is expecting this, is expecting a property that is called count. Okay, and there is a property in the state that is also called count. So to make this a little more interesting, right, instead of saying count here, I'm going to call it the count. Okay, it's more interesting, right? And what I'm trying to point out here is that the name of the property that I'm expecting doesn't need to match the property in the state. They don't have to match at all, right? So somehow, right, somehow I need to map the property that the count display is expecting. I need to map it to the state variable count that is being stored in the store and that is being provided to everybody, right? So how do we do that? Okay, the way we do that is as follows. We're going to import another function that is also noticed that is part of the glue, the React Redux library, which again glues the Redux library with the React side. So the way we glue it is as follows. See this counter display right there? Right, to glue the two together, right, we do as follows. We put we do connect. Connect is a function, and then we put this in a function like that. Now it's connected. It's connected. This does not contain export imported as default. Rina does not contain a default export. Oh, I'm sorry. This is in curly brackets. There we go. So it's still connected, right? So it's still the same. It's not doing anything. It hasn't done anything yet, right? Question, double parentheses. Yes, double parentheses. So connect takes this argument, something that we'll show you in a minute what it is, right? And connect returns a function, and that function takes as argument the thing that you want to connect. So double parentheses. So this is a function, and in JavaScript, functions are first order objects, meaning you can pass them as parameters and you can return them as parameters. So connect returns a function. This is not the first time you've seen this, right? You've seen this right here. You've also seen it in, actually, no, you haven't seen it. No, we haven't seen it. No, promises are objects. They're not functions. But here, this one returns a function. This returns a function, which we are then passing this argument to that function. Yep. Okay, so it's connected. It's not pulling out any data yet. It's not pulling out any data just yet, but it is connected. Right. So notice that it's still has this default value 321. Okay, so how are we going to pull, right, the data? So connect is going to get all the data that the provider is providing, right? So provider passes the store, which is the state that is generated by the reducer, to all the components. And then each component can use connect to pull out what they need. And what do I want to pull out? Well, I want to pull out this from the store, right, from the state, and I want to map it to my property, the count. So somehow connect, I need to tell it to do that. Hey, connect, grab from the state that count, and then pass it to me with that property. All right. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, we do that with a mapping function, a function that knows how to map from one object. It can map it to another object. So we're going to call this function the state, because we're going to grab it from the state. We're going to grab it from the state, and we're going to map it to a property. Okay, so it's a map. It's a function. Okay, there's a question on the chat. Can we initialize the state in the reducer? We did, right? Right here, we initialize it state, right? And we initialize it in the previous state like that, right? So that is the initial state 2, 3, 4. Okay. All right. So the state map, so connect gets called, and invoked by the provider. The provider calls all the connects, right, in all the components, that are the children of provider. Provider looks for anyone who has a connect function, and it will invoke it. It will call it. It'll call the connect function, and it'll pass the state. It'll pass whatever state you return from here. Right. So in here you put a function. Put the function here, the state to property mapper, and the state will be passed to you. The state will be passed to you, and we can say console log state. Right. So let's take a look at that. Inspect. And we can see that we are being passed the state. Wait, pass it, put it on the right. All right, so we go console, and we refresh. There it is. See that? Look at that. Count is being passed on line 8. All right, line 8 over here, where we are being passed the state. So right here, I'm being passed the initial state. So this over here, right? Whatever the initial state is, I'm being passed this. Okay? Because I did not pass an action, I did not pass it down or up. So I'm getting back the default previous state, which happens to be the initial state, 2, 3, 4. Right there. See that? In the state, in the console. 2, 3, 4. Okay? All right. All right. So what do I do with the state? What do I do with the state? I want to pull out state.count. And I want to map it to the count. Because I know this guy, counter display, is expecting a property. I want to pass it. I want to call counter display with an object that has the count in it. And it has to come out from the state.count. So how do we do that? So the way we do that is that we create the map. We're going to say const the map. We're going to say that the count, the property count, you're going to pull it out from the state.count. Okay? We create the map, and then we return the map. That's how you're going to map it. Where are you going to get the value of the count? From the state.count. Okay? And once you have this object, we're going to pass it to the counter display, and you will get the new value. Let's see. There it is, 234. See that? It's 234. It's exactly what we wanted, right? So I can initialize the state here, and this is now 1, 2, 3, 4. There it is. See that? 1, 2, 3, 4. So we are extracting from the reducer that is generating these states, right? That goes into the store, that goes into the provider, that goes into the connect, that goes into the mapper, and then the mapper passes it to the component through the property. Yeah, did you follow that plumbing? Let's go over it, right? We're creating a new state, right? The reducer initializes the state, right? And then there is no action. We haven't generated any action. So we default by returning the previous state, which happens to be this object, 1, 2, 3, 4. It goes into the store goes into the provider calls all the connects, right? Passing the state. You get the state right here. You create a new map that says the property that you're expecting, I'm going to grab it from the state, and you're going to use this map, right, to pass in whatever property you expect, and you can retrieve whatever you want. Did everybody follow that? Everybody still with me? All right, I'm just going to clean this up a little bit so that it looks a little more cleaner, right? So notice that what we could do here, that instead of, I don't need the console, I don't really need this intermediate variable. So I could just say here return. I just say that return. So that's a little bit cleaner, right? So this still works. This still works just fine. Let's see, it's a question on the chat. Does this approach match with any design pattern? Yes, it's what's this called? Yes, there's a design pattern. It's not model view controller. It's a state. What is it? Yeah, it has a name. I don't remember. It's I think it's in the slides. The pattern. You can take a look at the slides. But it's not model view controller. And one of the differences in model view controller is that in model view controller, what you do is that you manipulate or you mutate the state. Okay, you mutate the state. So whatever state you were before, you change it, and then and then that's the state, right? Here you're not changing the state. So these functions that are returning these values, right? What we're doing instead is that we're calculating a new state. It's not that we are changing the state from what it was, and then we're changing it to this new value. Instead, we are creating a brand new state, right? And then the application represents or renders that new state, right? In fact, we could keep track of all these states as a history of all the states that the application has been in, right? And we could use that mechanism to do an undo, right? Where we could backtrack our way into previous states, right? And maybe do like a pop, or put it in a stack, right? Where we can, either every time we generate a new state, we do a push onto a stack. And then if we ever wanted to undo, we can pop the stack and just go on to the previous state. So this is totally supported by Redux, right? Where we're not changing the state, we're always generating a brand new state, right? All stored and available inside of this store, right? And we could do forwards and reverse, backwards and forward. Okay, excellent. So we know how to read from the state. Notice that the counter display is completely oblivious of where is being declared. There is no dependency. Notice that there's no dependency between the counter display and the counter Redux component, between the parent and the child. There's no state dependency, which is great because I can put the counter display anywhere, right? Say, so I could put it. I can remove this from here, right? I can go into the counter down, and I can just put it in here, right? And notice that I've put it inside of a button. See that? I can put it anywhere in my application, right? And there's no dependency whatsoever where it was and where I can put it now anywhere else in the application, right? Whereas before, right, in the previous implementation, right, in the counter React, I mean, if I want to move this guy, I just want to cut it out and put it inside of counter up and paste it in here, I'll just break the whole thing, right? I'll just completely break it, right? Because there is a dependency between the state and any event handlers, between the parent and the child. Okay, that's why even though the let's go back, right? Even though the plumbing and the learning curve is so much higher, okay, in Redux, it's very, very popular because it gives you a tremendous amount of flexibility of now moving things around, without breaking anything, right? Because each one can decide what do they want to pull from the state, right? Without having any dependencies. Also, it allows us to implement applications more using functions, right? And functions are so much easier to test, right? Because they can be independently implemented, right? I can pass in the values that I want to test without having any dependencies where it's being rendered. Okay. All right. So let's do the other ones, the counter down and counter up. Now, counter up and counter down, right? What they want to do is they want to send events of up and down. Right. So how do we do that? Okay. So let's do that. So counter up and down. First, it all starts, right? It all starts with the connect, right? So we import the connect, from React Redux, okay? And we do the counter, connect, double parentheses, right? And that's still okay. That's still okay. So let's do down first. Let's do down. Okay, so how do we do that? All right, so connect, remember, connect has the takes as argument the mapper, right? A function that allows us to take out data from the state. Okay, we don't have a function, right? So we don't have a function. We don't want to take out anything from the state. I mean, we could if we wanted, but we don't need to, right? So I'm gonna empty it out. I'm gonna say the first argument to this is a empty function, right? Because I don't want to take out anything from the state. All right, so I can actually put it in a separate line. But this takes a second argument. It takes a second argument, right? And that second argument is what is going to allow me to tell and send these actions, these up and down actions, right? So the second argument is a function, right? That is going to map an on-click function here, right? With me being able to call this reducer and generate the up or the down, right? And the way we're going to do that is that we're going to have, just like we did in the other implementation, right? In the down, what do we have? We have a props down, right? And in the up, we have an up. So we're going to do the same thing here. We're going to do the same thing, right? In our implementation, right? We're going to have a down function, which we're going to invoke on an on-click. On-click, we're going to call down. There we go, right? So just like we mapped in the display, we mapped a property from the state. Here, we need to map this function to something, right? We need to map this property so that when we call that function, which is going to function, somebody has to pass us a function that we're going to invoke, which is going to allow us to call this reducer and pass it an action type. Okay, so it's going to be a function that's going to map a property down. We're going to map it to a dispatcher. A dispatcher is going to be a function that we can invoke, right? We can invoke the reducer and pass in this action. Okay. So instead of state, right, we're going to receive a dispatcher or dispatch. Okay, which is going to allow us to invoke the reducer. All right. Okay. All right. So what do we want to map? This is going to be the same thing. It's going to return an object that's going to map this down. It's going to map the down. I'm going to pass a function there. I'm going to pass you a function that you're going to be able to call. Alert down an object. So colon. Okay, so we're saying map into the down, right? This function. So pass this attribute down, pass it this function, so that if I click it, is going to invoke what function? The function that I passed it, right? And we pass it here as the second argument to the connect. So the first one allows you to map properties to state variables, and the second argument allows you to map properties to functions. Make sense? Okay. All right, so let's try it out. Let's if we click on this down, notice that we have the alert. See that? We are calling that alert. We're calling this alert. We're calling that alert, right? Everybody good? Does putting down in the parameter, there's a question here. So does putting down in the parameter create an empty property of the component called down? Does putting down in the parameter create an empty property of the component called down? Yeah, so down could be, if you don't pass us anything, down would be undefined, right? It would get no value, just be null or undefined, so that if I click on it, right, I would get an error. Okay, here we're making sure that we are indeed passing you something, right? Which is I'm passing you a function that is called that I'm mapping to your property down, and who's passing it to you? Connect. Connect is passing it to you, or whatever connect returns. Whatever connect returns is going to pass you the property, the function that you're expecting, right, with that name. Okay. All right. So we don't really want to do this. We don't want to do alert. Really, what we want to do is call this function, this reducer, right? And the way we call it is using the dispatch here. So we can call the dispatch. So let's move this alert. Call this, let's remove that alert, and instead we're going to call the dispatch. So by calling the dispatch function that we are passed here, we are invoking this reducer, right? So we can put here a console and say called from down, right? So let's see, let's inspect. I'm going to do the console clean up. So if I click on down, oops, actions must be plain. Oh yeah, it's complaining that I call the dispatcher. I'm calling the dispatcher, but I never passed an action. So it is required that if I call the dispatch, I need to pass an action. So let's pass an action. It's expecting an object. Basically, action is an object that has to have at least one property called type. So let's do that. Let's pass an object. We'll solid type. Okay, whatever. All right, so let's do that again. Call down. There we go. See that? Call from down. So we just invoked it. We can call it again multiple times. There it is. So it's being called a whole bunch of times. We can actually print out. We can print out the action that I'm passing. Okay, let's try it again. So down. There it is. See that? I'm passing call down, and I'm passing the type equal ASD blah 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 whatever. But what if I pass in the action? I pass exactly where you're expecting, up and down. See, if I say type and say up, Well, now, because it's equal to up, one of these cases is going to be true, and it's going to change the state. Right? It's going to create the new state with the count going up. Right? So if I click on up again now, there we go. I guess I got it wrong, right? I'm supposed to go down, right? I'm clicking on the counter down. This is supposed to be down. Sorry, down. Right. So let's try it again. So down. There we go. See that it's changing? It's going down. So I am generating all these new events, and we're calculating the next state, which is now the counter going down. So same thing with the up. All right, let's practice this. Let's do this exact same thing. Let's do this exact same thing with the up, right? So let's go up. So where's up? Here's up. Right, we haven't connected it yet. Right, this will give us a chance to practice this. Let's see. Is there a question here? Where exactly did we bind dispatch with the reducer for it to be called? Yeah, that's part of the infrastructure. We never bound it, right? It's bound by the provider, right? The provider, passes us, right? The provider calls all your connect functions. The provider calls all your connect functions, passing it two attributes, two parameters, right? So in the display counter, we are here in the connect, we are receiving two arguments, of which we only care about the first one. The second one, we're ignoring it. Here in the second one, we are also getting the dispatcher, right? We're also getting dispatch here, okay? But we are completely ignoring it. We're not using it at all, right? I'm just ignoring it. I'm not doing anything with it, right? So I always get two arguments. I always get two parameters, right? Now in the second one, in my down and my up, I'm not ignoring it, right? In the not this one, sorry. In the Redux state, right? In the down, I'm not ignoring it, right? I'm ignoring the state mapping, right? Because I don't want to read the state. Instead, I'm not ignoring the property dispatch. So it's a function that takes into dispatch, which allows it to call the reducer so that it can calculate the next state. It can update the state. All right, so let's practice this again. This is one of the harder aspects to understand in Redux. So let's practice it again. Let's go to the up. Let's go to up. So first thing, what do? We connect, right? So we import connect, okay, from Redux. We connect here. We say connect, parentheses, parentheses, like that. All right. Okay, and nothing changes. Everything's good, right? Nothing bad, nothing bad, right? Let's now, right? We typically, what do we do here is that we have two functions. We have two functions. We say the state to property mapper, right? Those are the two functions. One takes the state, whereas the other one, right, is the dispatch to property mapper, right? That takes in the dispatch. Okay, and we provide those two functions here as the state to property mapper and the dispatch to property mapper. Okay, now in this example, I don't care about the state. I only care about the dispatcher because I want to invoke an action to the reducer. I don't care about the state. Whatever the value of that count was, I'm ignoring it. I only care about wanting to call that. How do I want to call it? Well, you're going to pass me a property called increase counter. Okay, whatever name you want to give it, doesn't matter, right? And so on click, I'm going to call the increase counter. So what the dispatch mapper is going to do is going to say, okay, well, fine. I'm going to generate a map. That will map your property to this function. Okay, so that when you click here, when you click on that up button, you will invoke whatever function I'm passing you. And what will that function do? is going to call the dispatch. I'm going to call the dispatch, which calls my reducer. But the reducer is expecting an action. And in my action, I will let you know that the type of that action is that I want to go up. Okay? So if I go here up, notice that up now works going up or down. You see that? Does that make sense? Is everybody still with me? All right. All right. Well, let's do one more. Let's do one more just to practice, right? Just to practice. Let's do one more. How about I want to create a brand new button here that allows me to clear, counter clear. Again, just to practice, just to practice. Let's create another one here and say new component called counter clear. And this one's going to set the state to 0. Okay. All right. So let's do this. So it'll be import React from React, and this is going to be constant counter clear. Right, and it's going to be rendered by a button clear. Okay. And it's going to return, this is going to be export default counter clear. So in my counter Redux, let's import this that I just built. And there it is, right? So right now it's not doing anything. Oops. Wait, what do you mean it's not defined? I just defined it. Right now it's not doing anything. Okay. All right, so we want to map it and want to set the state to clear it. Yes? All right. So how do we do that? So here it's going to have a property, and the property is presumably clear the counter. Right. So if I click it, right, on click, it'll be clear the counter. All right. Right. So how do we hook it up? Well, we do a connect like that. And we need to import the connect, import connect from React Redux. Right. So it still works, right? Nothing broke. Okay. And we'll get the two mappers, the state to property mapper, which takes the state. Now we can make this a little bit more terse, right? This just returns, right now it doesn't do anything. And the other one is the dispatch to property mapper, which takes the dispatch, which returns, but I can do a more terse, I can say like that, right? This returns clear the counter, right? Maps to a function that just calls dispatch, right? Calls dispatch like that, right? Which is of type clear. Yep. Okay, and then I can just pass these two here. Oops. I can pass in the state to property mapper and the dispatch to property mapper. Okay. All right. So notice that it's not doing anything yet. So notice that I'm passing clear correctly to the reducer, but it's not doing anything. Well, because the reducer right now is not really doing anything with clear. I need to tell it how to handle the clear event. Case, if it's clear, what should we do? We should return count equals 0. Now let's try it. So up works, down works, or clear sets to 0. Everything make sense? All right. Excellent. So, all right. So one of the things that we should do is clean this up. Instead of this living here, right, we should declare here in the Redux state a directory where we contain all our reducers, all the reducers. And our reducer, I'm going to call it counter or count reducer, right? With some name that tells us what is it responsible for, because one could be responsible for the shopping cart, one could be responsible for our shipping, right? One for our whatever, our profile. So you can have any number of reducers maintaining all sorts of states that we are going to then collate into one big application state, right? But right now, this one is just doing this counter. So we're going to copy this. We're going to bring it over here into a separate file, and we're going to export this. We're going to export our counter. So export default reducer. Okay, like that. So here, instead of having it like that, we're going to just import reducer from count reducer. See that? And this still works the same way. So up, down, clear. And you've broken up, right? You've completely moved away, right? Instead of having all the state management and very tightly coupled components, right, with one another, you've moved them around and decoupled the state management from the rendering, okay, by using this new implementation. That makes sense? Okay, is there a question here? So in the real app, we would have multiple reducers handling similar states. Yes, exactly. And that's exactly what we're going to do in the new assignment. We're going to have a reducer handling the list of all the modules on the left-hand side, another reducer handling the list of all the lessons on the top right-hand side, another listing of all the topics, and the other one rendering all the widgets, right? And they all are going to collaborate, right, into creating a whole application-wide state. That makes sense? All right, so let's see. How much longer do we have? Do we have time to get started? Let's see. Okay, great. I have till another 15 minutes. Excellent. So let's get started, right, on manipulating, for instance, something a little more complicated, maybe a list of components. Okay. All right. So let's do that. So let's see. We have here in our index. We used to have here what do we had here? We have app. We had app here. App. Okay. And we would be able to go to course editor. So we want the course editor. We want the course editor to be its own little reducer that handles multiple things, right? We want it to handle the list of modules, lessons, topics, and widgets, right? And we want to be able to add modules, remove modules, edit modules, right? So how do we do that? Okay, so let's do that. Let's create here. From the beginning, we'll say here, the course editor will create a reducer that handles the courses, the modules, right? So we're going to create here a directory called reducers. And we're going to create a reducer that handles everything that has to do with modules. Right? So we're going to JavaScript here will be a module reducer. And the initial state might be something like, initial state might be modules is some array, right? Some array that has a list of modules, right? So for instance, it might be title that has CS5610, okay? Maybe an ID, okay? And let's just have a couple of these. 200, 5200, and this is, okay, that's my initial state. Okay, and my reducer might be something like const modulo reducer takes in the initial state, and then an action. Okay, and here might have a switch case, so it might be switch, right, with the action type. And here's where the different types of actions you might think of having, right? That would be all the different types of things that you could do with a module, right? What could you do with a module? Well, let's see. You could create modules. You can create a new module. Okay. You can maybe delete a module. Okay. All different things. Okay. Or default is that you might want to return, right? If it's none of those, if you're not creating a module or deleting a module or whatever, right? Or maybe you're updating a module. Okay. So by default, I'm just going to return the current state by default, right? This is very important, right? That you always have a default that returns the current state, right? If it's none of the actions before, default to the current state, which right now is just a list of modules. Make sense? And then we export this. We say export default module reducer. All right, make sense? All right, excellent. So now who wants this information? Who wants this state information? Well, probably the editor, right? The course editor wants this. The course editor probably wants this information. Okay, so we could grab the counter, right? We can get the state from over there. We can say import the module reducer. We can create a store. We can create a store from here, right? Create store from the module reducer. And then we can provide it to everybody under here. Right? We want to provide it to anybody who's under our editor. Anybody under our editor is going to want the state, right? The list of modules. Also, we might later on have the list of lessons and topics and widgets, and we'll learn how to do that next time around, right? We want to be able to combine all these reducers into one big application state, right? And now the level of granularity of how you break it up, that's more software engineering, right? How is it that you deal with something big and you split it up into something more manageable, okay? And so the course editor might have a module list, right? Module list component, right? So a module list, module list that might be rendering the list of all these modules. Okay, so it might be something like this: import React, React from React, and this would be const module list that presumably receives modules here, right? And it renders maybe H2 here, module list. And let's return here, export default module list. So the course editor maybe can render down here the module list, right? Okay, so there's our module list. What does our module list want to do? Well, our module list, presumably the provider is providing it with a store that contains this array. So I want to pull out these modules and render them. So the module list can just do what we just learned, right? We can connect, we can import, connect, right, from React Redux, right? So we can wrap this, connect, parentheses, parentheses. We can get a mapper. We can create our mapper. We can say const the state to property mapper. I'm going to wrap the state, and it's going to calculate that. Where am I going to grab the modules? I'm going to grab the modules from the state.module. See that? And I'm going to pass you. I'm also going to have the const dispatch to property mapper. It's going to have the dispatch. Well, although probably I won't need it. So right now I'm just going to leave it empty. So it's not going to do anything for now. But I'm going to pass these two to the connect.
Unknown caller.
Oh, sorry about that. Pass those two. Still works, not broken. But now I have modules here. I should be able to just iterate over those now. So UL class name list group. I should just be able to iterate over this, right? We say, I can say modules.map module, and then return line item list group item right, module dot title, right? And it broke. What? And define modules. Oh, maybe this has to be initialized to empty array. Let's see. Am I getting modules from state mapper, blah, 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 state dispatch connect, STMP, the course editor, store, provider, module reducer, store. What is this? Reducer, initial state, yada, 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 switch, yada, yada, defaults, initial state, module reducer, editor, blah, blah, module list. Let me print out here the state that I'm getting. So let's put this in a parentheses, and we're going to put this in a return. So there's a return here, and let's do a console log state array 3. So I am getting the array. And
Professor, you're accessing it wrong. I think it should be modules instead of module.
Oh, module. Oh, thank you. There they are, my 3 modules. See that? So where are these 3 modules coming from? Thank you. These 3 modules are coming from the reducer. You know, these over here. See that? We were able to pull this array from the reducer, right? And then map them to the module lists, right? Pull them out from the state, right? And then iterate over them and render them. That makes sense? All right. I think that was quite a bit of information. Let's see. Is there a question? Can each module be its own small component? Oh, yes, of course. Yep, definitely. Yes, certainly. And again, it's software engineering to decide whether it's useful to have a parent component just pass a state down to a child, right? And what kind of dependency do you want? Whether that's whether that's going to explode to the outside of the component, right? And it's going to propagate. So we want to control that where we don't want to get into the problem of parents sharing data with its child and maintaining that dependency. Maybe that dependency makes sense in certain spots, right? Where it's very self-contained, and it makes sense to make that dependency might make sense, right? But the more dependency that you have between the parent and the child, right, then you cannot move it around and put it anywhere you want, right? So it's a software engineering decision whether you want to create the dependency or not. This allows you to just eliminate the dependency, right, so that you can put it in different places. Why do you write modulus at line 24? Line 24. Yeah, remember that connect takes two sets of parentheses, right? First one is the mapping functions, and the second one is the actual component that you are passing the properties to. Yeah, so the first one is gets these two guys, and the second one is the actual component that you are wrapping around and passing those properties to. Okay. All right, folks, that's all I have for you. We'll come back next time we meet, right? We're going to expand on this idea, right? And actually revisit this reducer because we want to implement all these folks, right? We want to implement the create module, right? And how is it that we add to this, and how to remove, update, whatnot. And obviously at some point we want to hook this up to a server, right? How is that we hook up the state that you have here on the client, how you hook it up to a state that lives on a server, right? We want to synchronize those two, right? And we'll do that next time we meet. All right. All right, so yeah, so the assignment was moved to Wednesday. I'll update on that on Canvas. All right, Brian, thank you. Cheers.
Thanks, Professor.